My belief is that whether you're an officer or a director, you're able to influence anyone in your organization. And I really believe that. And I think when I say that, people go, yeah, right, whatever. I've been influencing from officer role all the way up. If you can really nail influence, you have more chance to make a difference in one day in the charity you're in than a lifetime outside the charity sector. And influence is such a big part of making that change happen. You do not have to be in the room to make change happen. When the CEO eventually says yes to this, you may not even be in the room, but be aware that you were in charge of the thing happening. Influence is not about getting people to do what you want, it's making sure that the best thing happens.
Welcome back to the Fundraising Bright Spots podcast. This is episode 159. My name's Rob Woods, and this is the show for fundraisers who want ideas and perhaps a little dose of inspiration to help you raise more money and really enjoy your job. This time, we're looking at influencing people within your charity. For many fundraisers and leaders, the fundraising with your supporters is the easy bit. It's trying to get sign-off from your Chief Exec or the trustees, or to persuade a colleague in a different department that often proves to be the difficult bit. To give you practical ideas, some helpful ways of looking at it, and a generous dose of encouragement that we can all make valuable progress in this tricky skill, I was very happy to be able to talk to one of the best fundraising leaders I've met, Paul McKenzie. Paul is a hugely experienced fundraiser with roles leading teams and departments at various UK charities, including Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital Charity, DePaul and Teenage Cancer Trust. Paul is now a consultant and coach, and he absolutely loves helping leaders and fundraising teams to perform at their best. Hello, Paul. Welcome to the Fundraising Bright Spots podcast.
Hey, Rob. How you doing?
Really well, thank you. And all the better for speaking to you, not least because we talked about this topic the other day with our Bright Spot Members Club, and they really got so much from it. And at that moment, I knew that I needed to twist your arm and see if you'd share it with our podcast listeners as well. Just before we get into the ideas to help our listeners know who you are and what you're all about, you've been a fundraiser for goodness, at least 2 decades or so in various fundraising roles and certainly various leadership roles as well. And now you work for yourself and your company is called Giant Steps. Could you give us the gist of what Giant Steps does?
I can. It's called Giant Steps because I'm 6'8", so if anyone has ever met me, the name is very obvious. But it's also about helping organisations take giant steps and individuals take giant steps. So I'm working on strategic planning and strategy with quite a few different organisations at the moment, and also doing quite a lot of work in mentoring, which is where I get a real kick out of helping people develop in their careers. So doing quite a lot of that as well. And loving it. It started in February and it's a totally different world, but really enjoying it.
Yeah. So I gather. And I know that one of the things I've always enjoyed your advice on is the solving of the various challenges that come not just with fundraising, but the leading of a fundraising team or function, and the helping fundraising succeed within the context of the wider organization and the building of bridges and so on with senior teams, trustees, chief exec, the other bits of a charity that need to function well in partnership with fundraising. I've always found your ideas so insightful on that, including a couple of sessions you've done for our Breakfast Club for fundraising leaders. One particular topic I think you said to me the other day doesn't come up so often in leadership courses and indeed on conference platforms is the detail and the specifics of positive influencing within an organization if you're the leader of the fundraising team. And I'd really like to focus this session just on what you've discovered about that. Some of our listeners are leaders themselves. Some of them are fundraisers in a team who nevertheless need to sometimes influence across, up, down, and so on. So I guess the first one is, why do you think we don't look at it or give it as much attention, this internal influencing piece, as we might?
I think it's because it's seen quite negatively. I think sometimes it's almost seen as And I think this is often the problem with influencing is it's seen as forcing people to do the thing you want. So it's almost seen quite negatively. People see it as sort of almost like a dark art, whereas I see it as a really positive relationship building thing that's about taking action and inspiring action. And so therefore I often think it's not talked about enough. But interesting enough, if you ask any fundraiser, you're sitting in a pub with a fundraiser and you ask them what their problem is rarely external. Their problem is often internal. Their problem is I can't get something done, or this person won't let me do this, or this team has stopped me doing something. And I think that is the frustration, almost my passion to try and get this better in organizations, is to unleash some of that potential, like the millions of pounds that are sitting in people's heads who aren't getting their ideas through because they don't really know how to make them happen in organizations. I also think there is an issue where people believe that kind of that influence is only at high level. My belief is that whether you're an officer or a director, you're able to influence anyone in your organization. And I really believe that. And I think when I say that, people go, yeah, right, whatever. But I truly believe that I've been influencing from officer role all the way up. And I guess the thing I would say is, I always say this, that I'm as nervy, I have as many issues with self-esteem as the next person. I came onto this podcast thinking I'm probably not worthy to talk on this podcast. I'm like everyone else. But the thing that I've understood is that if I can use some of my own personal skills to create influence, that's where I have power, that's where I can create change. There's a great line in West Wing that says you can make more change in one day in the White House than you can in a lifetime outside it. And I think it's the same in the charity sector. If you can really nail influence, you have more chance to make a difference in one day in the charity you're in than a lifetime outside the charity sector. And influence is such a big part of making that change happen.
Yeah. And one thing that comes through there is it's not about whether you think you're the most confident person in the room. It comes from, what can I do? Why do I care about doing something better? And if we tune in to why we care and what we want to achieve, actually that is in and of itself a massive lever. And it makes up for the fact that right now we may or may not feel 10 out of 10 confident or skillful compared to other people here. I guess the starting point you did the other day was this notion of not trying to be someone else and polish up your weaknesses. If we're ever going to be really at our best, so much of it is going to come from knowing who you are and leaning in to your best self.
Yeah, I think I'm always really interested when you talk to fundraisers and they talk about being a leader or about negotiating or influencing, and they tell you about how they have to be someone else. They'll start listing, or, I need to be like this, or I want to be like that person or this person, or we need to do more of that. And they talk themselves out of realizing, like, the best person to influence the organization and do your influencing is you. And the more you try to be someone else, the more you will be seen through, the more you'll be bad at it, because it won't be authentic. People will see that. Like, the thing I always say is, like, from an influence and stakeholder management, you are doing it right now. So today, whoever's listening to this podcast convinced their wife to do the washing, convinced their mate to go to the bar to buy them a pint because they couldn't be bothered getting up, or convinced the corner shop to open early to give them milk. Like, they are influencing all the time. And when they did that, they used themselves. They thought they used their skills. And I think, like, a big factor in influencing is about being you. It's about really understanding what your superpower is. But I remember when I got one of my first jobs that I was in, and I managed this big committee, and I had two chairs that sat on it. And they would happily say that they were tricky chairs. Like, they were wonderful people who created a massive change, but could be a pain now and then. And when I started, they were going straight into the CEO, and I couldn't make change through them going to the CEO. Anytime there was a problem, the CEO got a phone call, everyone got panicked, and I couldn't do anything. And I was determined that, like, the only way I could do the job was to get my hands on them and not them go to the CEO. And I remember talking to my wife saying, I think I'll have to leave because, like, it's just not working. They don't come to me. How can I do my job? And my wife said, well, why don't you just do what you're good at? And I went, what do you mean? She said, well, you can make all your friends come to the pub when they're all in their pajamas. Like, well, like, you've got an ability. You are good at chatting to people and convincing them of your idea. So why don't you use that? That's your superpower. Why don't you use it? And I thought, well, yeah, okay. So I went in and I sat to my director and I said, I think this is a problem. I'm not going to get change unless I can change this. Do you think I could talk to the CEO? And he went, yeah, right, please get on with it. And I remember my CEO used to work late on a Wednesday. I knew that she stayed late. And if she stayed late, that would be my way of being able to say hello to her without it being weird. So I used to go upstairs, I'd walk round the top. And one night she was there and I walked round and there was no one else in the office. And I went, evening. She went, oh, hello. And I went over and said, have you got 5 minutes? Yeah, sure. And I went just chatting to her. I said, I'm doing this thing. I know they contact you a lot. She said, they contact me all the time. I said, I think I can change that, but I need your help. I need you to push back. And I think if you push back, I think I can get the change. And I can't promise you it, but I'd really like to have a go at it. And she went, okay. And that was when it started shifting. And we doubled the size of that event. It became really big. I got good, both those people, chairs would say that we have good working relationships. I've worked with them since in other charities. And the CEO, I remember the CEO saying that the reason that she gave me that opportunity was that she liked me. She didn't like the fancy leader I was or the guy with the big ideas or this other. She liked that I came up and had a bit of faith in myself and said, I think I can do this. And I think everyone has to hear that. If you can work out, like in my training, I tell people to go back to something that someone has positively, what was the last bit of good feedback you had? And when was the last time you influenced someone in anything, personal, professional? And why was that successful? And write it down. So you think about, when did I last influence someone and why was I successful? And it will be something about you, about the way that you did something, the way the person engaged with you, how you spoke, how you acted. That's your power. And then you have to think, okay, how do I use that in my professional setting on repeat? And the more people get confidence in not trying to be someone else and being themselves in this place, I think the world's your oyster.
Yeah, it's such a good story. And so much of success is finding where you're good and allowing those resources to show up where you currently struggle more. But just a couple of weeks ago, you did a similar session for our members club. And there's a wonderful fundraiser who I know quite well now. She's been in the club for quite a while. And she answered that question she kindly shared with the group about that very morning. She had taken the dog for a walk in the rain without putting its little coat on. And this hairy dog had got back really wet and bedraggled. And she just couldn't face the drying of the dog. And she very thoughtfully told us the 2 or 3 things she did to persuade her partner to dry the dog. 2 or 3 of those things were, 1, she told a really interesting, entertaining story. 2, she did it with a twinkle in her eye. And I know that she just is, she has a sort of an energy, a positive, warm energy whenever she talks. And thirdly, she paid her partner a sincere compliment and told him, but you just are better at this than me. And I believed her. And I think he or she would have believed her too.
The minute she talked, you just could see that there would be very few people in any position in an organization that would say no to this person if she talked to you like this every day. And I think that's so important, is that belief in the fact that you do definitely have that skill. You maybe have to spend a little bit of time reflecting and finding it and believing in it.
Just one other point. A couple of weeks ago, you had a phrase about putting your hand up or keeping your hand down.
I think in any fundraiser, anyone who works the work will understand it, recognize this example. You're sitting in a meeting and someone asks a question, and in your head, you have the answer. You know straight away, I've got it. And do you put your hand up and say it, or do you keep your hand down? And I think what often happens is that you have a choice of being brave and thinking, is my point of view worth hearing? And I think negotiating and influencing in so many things is about that small moment of bravery. Because if you put your hand up and say it, the leader hears you say it, it's the idea that goes forward. My odds are better if I take a positive action. And a positive action is saying the thing I'm thinking. Because what I can promise you is there is not a leader in this sector who is not crying out for their team to put their hand up. But they are desperate. When they ask that question, he is sitting there cowering, going, please, someone put their hand up. I just want someone to have an idea. Even if it's rubbish, I just want to hear something. Please, people. And I have room my hands down is the most upsetting thing. You put your hands up, you're the person who is sticking their neck out. And that is the most exciting thing as a leader, is to see that around the table. So it's not only have you got a chance of succeeding, I promise you it will generally be welcomed. People are desperate for that input.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a generous act to be vulnerable and offer something, because it just signals to the other people in the room that they might then either offer their version, which could be different to yours, or they could build on what you said, and now teamwork is happening and everything becomes more possible because of that 3 seconds of courage. The good news, dear listener, about this one is I predict that at some point in the next 12 hours, either in your work life or your personal life, there just will be a moment when you can practice this deep breath, just offer something. Paul's notion of metaphorically putting your hand up with that moment of courage, even if you don't know how it's going to turn out.
Hey there, this is Rob, and I wanted to quickly let you know about our 2 long-standing courses designed to help you grow high-value fundraising results. That's the Major Gifts Mastery Programme and the Corporate Mastery Programme, which are starting again from October 2024. Of course, I could tell you all about them myself, but it might be more interesting for you to hear from someone who's experienced one of these courses. So here's some feedback we received recently from Naomi Campbell from a charity called Fields of Life, who took part in the most recent Major Gifts Mastery Programme.
It was amazing. I've worked now in the charity sector for about 8 years, and it's the best training that I've done in my time working in the sector. I think for me personally, it was about having the confidence and the techniques that you taught so practically and interactively and in such a fun way to really build my own confidence. I think I've noticed a huge shift in my own mindset when it comes to fundraising and working with major donors that has just allowed me to enjoy my job so much more, really. Trust fundraising can feel quite lonely at times, so to have that camaraderie, that group of people who are just willing you well, that you can learn from each other, safe space to bounce ideas off each other, and then leave the room feeling more inspired, more determined, more encouraged to do the best job you can. I think tons of value in that for me.
To find out more about either Corporate Mastery or the Major Gifts Mastery Programme, go to brightspotfundraising.co.uk/services.
Paul, I'd love to move on to the second idea you shared the other day, in addition to this notion of kind of embrace and know the 1 or 2 things you are good at, what you could call your strengths or your genius. But what's the next idea that you find helpful?
So this thing, what I call playing chess, which sounds a bit weird, but the concept of it is, like, I think that if you're going to really be good at influencing, is you have to be able to really think from a bigger picture about who do you need to influence. And I got this thing about this chessboard analogy. And so I remember when I worked with a load of major donor fundraisers at Battersea, I really wanted them to think bigger about who they had to influence to make things happen. So I bought them all these magnetic chessboards, and they all had them on their desk. And what I wanted them to do was to think about it is, if you think about every one of those pieces on the chessboard as the people you have to influence, you are the person in control of the chessboard. Now, you may not be the one actually making the move, but you are in control. You have the power to move people to certain places. And a win does not come after one move. A win comes after 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 key moves of different people to different places to get your thing over the line. A good example is, I was once working in corporate partnerships. I had this big partnership that we had, but for me, it didn't make enough money. They gave us a load of gift in kind, and I had another partner who would give us the same gift in kind and a load more money. But there was a lot of complexity around it because there was relationships in different places, and our CEO had other relationships with this company, blah, blah, blah. So there was loads of stuff that was connected to it. And so I had to sit down and I went, okay, chessboard out. What do I have to do to make this happen? And I knew that I had to get marketing to be happy with it. I had to get comms to be happy with it. I needed to make sure that my director was comfortable with it. I had to make sure that operationally we were happy with the gift in kind. And I knew that my CEO would be nervous about trustees. So I went away and I spoke to every single one of those people in each one of those teams. And I listened to what I asked them. If I did this, what would happen? Why would it be good? Why would it be bad? And I shaped the idea and I made a few changes to it, and I changed it, or I got it to a place where I went, actually, it was still very much, we could still do it, but I'd understood what I needed to mitigate all the risks. And then I went and sat with my CEO and I went, CEO, I would like us to do this. And her instinct was, well, but what about all these issues? I said, it's okay. Operationally, we can do this to fix the problem. Marketing-wise, we can do this. Comms-wise, we can do this. And I've got a plan of how I think we can influence the trustees. I think the two ones that are going to be the biggest thing for you are these two people. And I've done some work and I think we can influence them this way. What do you think? And she just went, okay. Because there was nothing I hadn't unpicked. I had done all the legwork. I'd done all the influencing for her. The only person who needed to feel okay about it was her. She had no reason to not feel okay about it. We went to trustees. They said they were fine. And we went off and started working with it to build the partnership. And now, if I'm honest, we didn't actually get the partnership in the end, FYI. But I think it's important to be transparent. But to be honest, I got myself internally into the game. And I think that's the most important thing. And I really think often what fundraisers feel is that they don't have the power to make something happen. And it doesn't necessarily mean to get something signed off by your CEO. It doesn't mean that you have to go to your CEO, but you have to influence the chain of effects and own the chain of effects to get to that decision. So if you feel that you have to tell your manager, to tell the head of, to tell the director, to tell the CEO, you have to plan that out, but also you have to own it the whole way, even if you're not in the room. Because I think what often happens is people go, I told my manager, hasn't happened, I'll go moan about it in the pub now. And I think what happens, what you have to do is, okay, I told my manager, and they still haven't done it. I'm going to check my manager. Have you spoken to the head of yet? Would it be good if I put some time in for you to speak to the head of? Okay, yeah, that would be great. And you have to own every part of that, even when you're not in the room. And again, if you think about the chess analogy, it's the moving of the pieces. You do not have to be in the room to make change happen. When the CEO eventually says yes to this, you may not even be in the room, but be aware that you were in charge of the thing happening. And it's the same in major donor fundraising. You may not make the ask, but you made sure the ask happened. And to me, that's what good stakeholder management is, owning the whole thing from start to finish. And that can be at officer level. You don't have to be senior to do that. You just have to take responsibility for that change.
I really love this one. One reason I love it is the moment you even embrace this game, in the analogy of it, you can move pieces. And before you started embracing this analogy, it's a strong chance that your belief system was that who am I to get this very powerful person to do anything? So as soon as you start even playing with it, well, it's very definitely my hand that moved. I wanted it to move 4 squares, but maybe it just moved 1. Another reason I like it is there's just some interesting things from neuro-linguistic programming about perceptual positions and getting perspective or different ways of seeing things. It brings new resources to your brain to solve stuff, and I think it increases clarity, therefore, and good ideas, because you can see the wood for the trees, compared to when you're walking the dog or you can't sleep at night and all of these issues and problems are going around in your head. Actually, another tactic that has helped some people I've coached is just to draw it on a big piece of paper, like in those cop shows where they're trying to work out who the serial killer is. Just the act of drawing characters on a paper and making lines happen already helps actually quite a lot. But going one step further and actually them being pieces you can move rather than having to keep rub out lines, I think that's next level.
Yeah, I think that just often realizing that you do have power here. And I think often fundraisers go, I don't have any power. And it's just not true. You have to grab at it, you have to pull it, you have to own it, you have to make it happen. Like you can have power and influence in so many different things if you can start to get to grips with this model.
Yeah. I think the other bit of it is whenever I play chess with my son, my plan initially that I had rarely pans out, but it's the interacting of the pieces on the board combined with what he does that creates the magic of an interesting game of chess. And every corporate partnership I'm aware has ever been won, like how the company ended up giving money and what it did with your charity and so on is always different from what your initial plan was. But that's the beauty of it. The more conversations you have with the king and the queen and the knight and the bishop or the policy director, of course, they're going to bring things to the solving of this problem for the benefit of the charity that you couldn't possibly have known before you chatted to them or before you put them in the room with your chief exec. So it's the iterative nature of the game, but at least thinking this way empowers you and gets you starting to move some pieces, and then the magic happens.
Exactly.
So there was one more idea that I found really helpful the other day for our listeners. What would that be?
I think it always feels a bit obvious, but I don't think it's more about how you, so it's the relationship building. So you start to believe in you and you start to get a plan of who you need to influence, and then how are you going to build relationships. But I think it's about understanding that relationship building is a constant. I think often what happens is when people reach a point of need, I need to influence, they then start to build relationships. And for me, that's too late, because you haven't got a relationship. You're going to be going in cold, probably at a point of crisis or a point of slight awkwardness or slight disagreement, and you haven't got the bonus points. And if you haven't got any bonus points, you can't spend them. If you can't spend them, it's much harder to get influence over the line. And so I really believe that it's a bit like exercise, relationship building. If you only do it now and then, it is not going to make a difference. You have to be doing relationship building every day as a habit. You have to do your push-ups. And if you don't do your push-ups every morning, you're not going to get the change. An example I would give is I've done an interim role recently, and I went in, and the first thing I did was write down all the names of the people I felt I could need in the next 4 months of that interim role. Not definitely need, no, but like the reality is that I was a deputy director role. I needed to make sure I had a brand, head of comms. I needed to make sure that I had a good connection with the director of marketing. So I got like probably a list of 8-9 names, and I went and asked them all for a coffee, introduced myself, asked them what they thought worked well, what didn't work well, how could I help more. And I instantly had all these relationships, but with no purpose. I just had relationships, and I knew what their view in the world was. And hopefully they thought it was nice for them to come and ask, and he was really interested in my area. And then over 4 months, stuff went wrong. I needed help. I needed to be able to influence. And I was able to go in and lean on those relationships and say, actually, we chatted. I know you were really interested in this. I've got a problem. I think we could try and fix it. And it becomes a collaboration. And I think you have to be able to do that every day. In the training, what I say is, you think about your chessboard, pick a couple of pieces off that chessboard and think about how you're going to start building relationships with them next week. Like what's the 2 things you could do? And even once you've had that first meeting, relationship is about engaging on a regular basis, checking in, walking past their desk, saying hi, asking them how they're doing. And I would say that for me, often what goes wrong in influencing is people believe that influencing is about making everyone do the thing they want to do. And that is not what influencing is. Influencing is not about getting people to do what you want. It's making sure that the best thing happens. Now, first of all, I think you probably have got a really good idea in your mind that's 80% there. What you need to do is when you start to use these relationships is you've actually got to actively listen to what the person's saying. You've got to listen. Like I use the expression, you've got to be non-biased, but you've actually got to be going, I have an idea I would like to make happen. Do you think it works? Why don't you think it works? How could we do it together? How do we make this happen? Because what I see from people is when they influence, they get frustrated. They go and basically tell someone they want something to happen. The other person says, I don't think that can happen. And then they go, fed up with this place. And they haven't tried to influence, negotiate, or build a relationship. That's not how relationships work. So you have to go in, be non-biased, be the person who's trying to find a middle ground, because your idea will only benefit from that as well. If you're trying to influence a big opportunity or get something over the line, each one of those people will be experts. If you're listening and slightly altering your idea as they go so they get on board, it's probably making the idea better. It's diversity of voice. It's bringing more. Like the thing I am certain of is you can create change. The other thing I'm certain of is you're not always going to be right. You have to listen to others and shape that. And for me, that's key. And the exercise of haven't chatted to the head of brand in a while, I'll drop them a Teams message and see how they're doing. They fancy grabbing a coffee. Like I'm all for regular 1 month check-ins, half an hour coffee, because I think that's the oil that makes influencing work. And to me, without it, nothing else happens. And if you go back to the you thing about who are you, that's where your strength of relationship comes from, is be you. Go and act with people, work with people, build relationships in the workplace. One, because you'll get stuff done. Two, it makes work really pleasant. So it's kind of you can't lose in that situation.
Yeah. And a lot of what you talk about may well be work, but hopefully there are going to be moments before you get onto the work thing where you just do pay attention to them telling you how their weekend was, or why they're struggling to sleep at the moment, or whatever it might be. And in those moments, obvious as it sounds, deeper trust just does form, a greater sense that they know you do care about them and their point of view. That's so valuable and often not present if we leave it too late, when we really need to get something done and the trust hasn't been built. I guess if you had a challenge or a suggestion to our listeners for how they could build muscle in this area today, what would you ask them to think about?
I think, again, it comes down to bravery, because I think actually some people will find this quite hard. Like I'm lucky in that I quite like chatting, if anyone's noticed. So therefore, I'm able to do this with probably more ease than others. But what I would say is actually, I think being brave and taking steps. So I would write down 2 names you think you should. The way I said it the other day in training was, think of the person who is your biggest blocker at work. Get that picture person's in your head. You have a name instantly. Everyone who's listened to this just had a name. Okay. Now that person is going nowhere and is causing you issues. So what is the next thing tomorrow that you do to change that relationship to be more positive? Coffee, nice email, got by their desk. What's the one thing you could do? And I think you've just made a first step in starting to change the relationship. If you can get that, again, you move a bit further and you build some more trust. My bet would be you have more chance of that blocker to be less of a blocker. You are trying to build a relationship that is transparent and honest. I see so often in these situations where people kind of almost get frustrated that they are not getting their thing done. You have to stop thinking about it as your thing. You are trying to do the best thing for the organization. And I believe you have ideas in your head that you should be sharing more. And when you start to influence on that, you do have to listen and learn. Like for me, relationship building is the best place for learning. And the reason that I have done all right in my career is because every time I went to try and influence someone, I paid attention to the thing they were telling me. So I knew more about brand is because I listened to the brand person I was trying to influence. I know about IG because I listened to the person in IG that I was trying to influence. And I learned. And I would say that the most valuable thing in growing into management roles and leadership roles, people often think I need more line management. It's not. If you can do this, if you can build relationships and make things happen in organizations through being trustworthy and engaging with your colleagues, you are priceless. You are transformative to organizations. The classic one in fundraising is fundraising and marketing, right? Are like everywhere you go, they're ready to have a fight at some point. And if you can be the person who stands in the middle and goes, I think we've all got a point of view. How do we get the right thing to happen? You will lead the world. Relationship building is about not picking a side, is about getting the right thing done. And if you can be that person who stands in the middle and goes, how do we find this middle ground and how can we make that happen and get sign off, then honestly, like, the world's your oyster. It really is.
Such a good point to end on, because we've come full circle. One of your earliest points was, if you're a good fundraiser, then you can be a good internal influencer. And in my book about fundraising, The Fundraiser Who Wanted More, one of the key principles that we explore is, if you really want to positively influence someone, the first step is to understand and appreciate their world. And really, everything you've just been saying is so wise and accurate, I think, because it's the need. Not that it's always easy if there's a bit of history between your team and their team, but nevertheless, to take a deep breath and do your best to not just understand what's going on for them, but also even appreciate it emotionally, why it might be hard for the head of marketing in this context and so on. Any effort at all to try to do that has to be better than not trying to do it at all. Paul, there's so many ideas we could talk about on this important topic, but time has run out. thank you ever so much for again coming to share your thoughts, your examples, your tips. I really appreciate it. I look forward to talking to you again on the podcast at some point. But for now, Paul McKenzie, thank you very much.
Thanks, Rob.
So there you go. I love Paul's take on positive influencing because he shows us that it's more within our grasp than many people are aware, especially if we break it down and make use of who we really are and what we're already good at. Now, if you like Paul's take on leadership and confidence, then check out episodes 23 and 24, where he talks about 5 things that are especially important for fundraising leaders to make time for, especially when you're under pressure. And if you've not already subscribed to the Fundraising Bright Spots podcast, do click that subscribe button now. You'll get instant access to dozens more examples and techniques to help you with your fundraising and leadership, including those 2 other inspiring episodes that I made with Paul. As we always do, we'll put a summary of today's show in the episode notes on the podcast section of our Bright Spot website, as well as a link to Paul's company, Giant Steps. And if you'd like to find out more about our 2 famous training programs, that's Corporate Partnerships Mastery or the Major Gifts Mastery Program, which have now helped hundreds and hundreds of people to improve their fundraising and raise more money over the last decade, we are now taking bookings for the next programs. We know from long experience that these courses always sell out, so if you'd like to find out more, I suggest you do it today if you can. All the information is at brightspotfundraising.co.uk/services. Finally, if you found today's podcast helpful and you think it would help other people too, please don't keep it to yourself. It would be wonderful if you could shout it from the rooftops, tell a friend, share it with your team or on social media. We'd love to know what you think about today's show. We're both on LinkedIn, and on Twitter, Paul is at ScottTallPaul. That's ScottTallPaul. And I am at Woods_Rob. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the Fundraising Bright Spots show. Good luck with your fundraising and your leadership, and I can't wait to share more encouraging stories with you very soon.